Diablo 4 has started Season 2, the Season of Blood, and with that seasonal content, there are quality of life updates and buffs to certain classes. Players who left in frustration after first starting the game and after perhaps starting Season 1 may feel inclined to give this season another shot. I played a lot of this game. I maxed out my Necro build after the initial experience nerfs just to be able to take on Uber Lilith. And while it was starting to get to me and I was starting to hit a wall with my enjoyment in the game, part of me wanted to continue with the Season 1 content coming around, and especially with the hopes and indications that there would be certain quality of life updates and enhancements in the player's favor. That hope was undercut by the repeated nerfs to skills and to experience that made it feel like the devs were not attempting to listen. It pushed the game further into feeling like a vessel for microtransactions and less like an attempt to make a fun game. And even with that feeling set in, I still continued on with doubts, but still hope that with the season release, the burnout for the game would subside and I would have some fun playing it again. And so I pushed on, even past the burnout of the original game, and then started the Season 1 content, Season Malignant. And I'm telling you this context so that you can understand where I'm coming from when I give my perspectives on this current season. Because in Season 1, all of my hopes and the holdouts for a renewing vigor to the game were misplaced. Season 1 did not seem to do much to actually enhance the player experience, with many known quality of life issues and impacts to players' builds. At this point, I felt like there was more time spent on making sure the battle pass system was best positioned to exploit players, and that nerfs would continue to be going out so that the player base who would be in a continuous search for the best build would have a different objective to reach without the devs having to spend time and money on creating that content. It's easy to place this on devs, but these are not dev decisions at the end of the day, and that it is a systemic problem across an organization, with many of these decisions having to be made at multiple levels, with either not enough pushback from those below who truly wanted to make a good game, or with pushback that was otherwise ignored. So this is where I was at starting Season 2. I had a game that started as a fun experience, and slowly it became a worse and worse experience through intentional changes made by the developer that seemed only to have the goal to not maximize fun, but to maximize time spent in the game world, with design decisions by talented enough developers that it can only be seen as malicious and intentional. With Season 2 coming around, there have been a lot of rebalance changes and quality of life improvements to hopefully return to that experience that I started with. And with the seasonal content, hopefully having enough of a twist that those quality of life changes, it does not feel stale. After putting a few hours into the new season, I can confidently say, for me, that it is too little, too late. The vampiric abilities are nice additions, but they aren't really new content, in the sense that you will change builds with them, but they're all passives, and so your engagement with this system is passive. It is less new content for you to enjoy and more the destination of your time towards endgame, with an experience grind that I can already see is going to be slow enough that it just gives you motivation to log in and continue to grind. There is a story here and there is new content in that story, but the progression of that story can only go so far before you are locked out of the next section by having to complete more seasonal objectives. They wanted so badly to have something for you to sink your time into and to engage in these seasonal activities that even the narrative was locked behind the grind. Now, there is the chance that the experience would improve as you continue on in the game. I've spent a lot of time on it, but not a lot of time relative to what the game demands of you. Whether or not the game is justified in demanding that and demanding the more fun experience, I will leave up to you. But what I can definitively say is that the fun does not exist within the first few hours, which is disappointing because I did enjoy the first few hours of the normal campaign and continued to play it for much longer than I probably should have. Certainly much longer than the fun lasted. And because I was aware of this, I was more skeptical coming in and very critical. But even with the quality of life improvements, there just isn't enough here to justify that initial spend, even in the case that there is more fun to be had later on. That expectation of the fun coming later is very common in MMO and MMO light games. And while it personally stops me from recommending recommending it, I can at least see why others would justify their time in the game. But Diablo, to me, is much more uniquely positioned than many of those other types of titles that have this same issue. Within those well-established MMOs that also have this problem, that also require the player to invest multiple hours before the fun begins, there is a known payoff at the end. The experience that you're going to have is very well defined and is well expected. But here, for Diablo and in Season 2, no one can really make that claim. There are people who are already well into the endgame and can share their justifications of it being fun, but because of Blizzard's track record so far with Diablo 4, who's to say that nerfs tomorrow don't crush the one thing you're working for? Who's to say the experience doesn't fundamentally change because of balance changes, and now the fun that you are searching for, you can no longer get? And that's the problem here. No one can make informed decisions about what you're spending that unfun time to get to, when most of the game is so unstable in the commitments Blizzard is willing to stand by. And so that's where I land. For me, it's not worth it. I don't recommend it, and I can understand why a player might look at the endgame and might look at other people who have hit endgame and say that time sink is worth it to get to that point, but I would just remind you that there's no guarantees. And in fact, from the track record so far, it's very fair to have the expectation that by the time you get there, or by the time you've started having fun, there will be other changes, patches, and other ways identified that they will try to pull you back to the grind.